Appreciate you all being here on behalf of the House Democratic Caucus. I appreciate the members of my caucus who took time to come and visit with you today. They're here to help me answer any questions that you all may have about a whole variety of issues. The only introductory statement I'll make is on behalf of the caucus. I'll make two statements. On behalf of the caucus, our thoughts and prayers are still with the people of Moore and Shawnee and all of those who've been affected by the tornadoes. We're with the first responders. We're with our thoughts and prayers are with the state troopers and all involved. We appreciate the governor's efforts to work hand in hand with the President of the United States to ensure that federal money is immediately accessed for those people so they can start the rebuilding process to rebuild their homes and their lives and their families. And to all those who we lost, we know it is a difficult time, and many of us have dealt with tragedy either in our own lives or in our own communities with tornadoes in the past, and so our hearts go out to them. On a note, we are still in session, which means business is still taking place. The other comment that we'll make is we are disappointed that we're now just a few hours away from ending this legislative session. And the people who needed help the most this session, who do a lot for us, teachers and state troopers and Department of Corrections employees, instead of accessing the resources that we have available to us to take care of those individuals. And what they do for us has never been more apparent than when teachers are shielding the bodies of children in the school, at Plaza Towers Elementary School, or the state troopers in the brown shirts out there digging through rubble. At that time, when it's clear that those people deserve to have their state stand with them, what we've seen in the last few days are political games being played with the issue of their pay raises, and we are highly disappointed in that. And if and when we gavel out for the session, for the year here in a few hours, if no serious commitment is made by the Republicans and the governor to take care of those first responders, it will have been a disappointing session, to say the least. And with that, I know there are a lot of other subjects, and we can open it up to.
Explain what you mean by the games being played about.
Well, no, what you saw, what happened earlier this week, when the Speaker of the House sent out a press release that said House Republicans offer tornado relief. We were a little shocked by that, to be honest with you, because it wasn't as if it was a partisan issue to begin with. Our caucus fully supported accessing the rainy day fund to ensure that money got to those folks who need it. But then they also throw in a trooper pay raise, and they acted as if it was a done deal. After we had fought for it for all session long, and in their own budget when they demonstrated their priorities, that money wasn't there for troopers. But then they roll out we're going to take care of troopers when they're out there on the front line. And we thought, well, that was wonderful. And so we issued a press release saying it's a little late in the game, but we stand with the Speaker. And our hope was that they had already negotiated with the governor and the pro tem to ensure that pay raise would happen. Well, come to find out, that negotiation never happened. The governor and the state Senate still opposed a trooper pay raise. Thus, you can see the bill has gone nowhere. And so what ended up happening, as was revealed to us, is that they were essentially trying to earn political points by saying that they supported it when they had an opportunity to support it in the actual budget and refused to do so.
According to last night, they did grab the bill, returned it to the conference committee's instruction to give a pay raise to troopers effective July 1st, 2014, which is, well, how would you describe that? That's a political game to be shipped with the capital letters.
Well, they knew it wasn't going anywhere, and in fact, the motion that was made was after I made that motion. Representative Wright's bill had died, and to Representative Dorman's credit, he understood the rules, said, we discovered a way that we could try to make that trooper pay raise happen. They voted against it. They refused to allow us to do it. And then a few hours later, they decided, oh, well, it'll probably look bad form. And so they allowed Representative Wright to run essentially our instructions to give a trooper pay raise.
What were your instructions for this fiscal year, before the fiscal year?
They were for this immediately.
Right. And then theirs, Representative Wright,
was for next year. Mm-hmm. And even in our negotiations and our discussions with them over things like the Pops Museum and the Cultural History Center, when they came out and said, oh, we can find $80 million for those projects over the next few years, we said, so be it. If you think that we can prospectively tie the hands of the legislature next year for their budgetary priorities when it comes to museums, well, then let's do the same thing. We were even willing to this year concede, fine, if you don't want to give a trooper pay raise this year or DOC pay raise this year, We oppose it. We think we disagree with you that we can't do it. We think we actually absolutely can. But then let's vote on that for next year. Then let's at least give a commitment to our troopers. And when we tried to do that earlier, just in the last couple of weeks, they said no, and then they run it out just yesterday after it looked bad form. And so, yeah, it's just gamesmanship. And I think the people back home, I know our troopers are fed up with it. Pat McGuigan asked me a couple of weeks ago how the session went, how the session has gone, and now that we're right here at the end, I can go down the list of it again. I mean, if you're a retiree in the state of Oklahoma, it's been a bad session. You didn't get a cost of living adjustment. If you're a teacher, it's been a bad session. If you're a public school administrator needing more resources because you've had increased class sizes, you didn't get enough resource, so it's been a bad session.
Make under the amount to get a tax cut.
That's right. If you're one of the bottom 42% of the state who won't receive any benefit from a tax cut that was passed, but we'll see the negative impact of the tax cut because you won't have resources put into your budget, and you just happen to be a driver in the state and you're going to watch your driver's license go up by $12, so you got no tax cut, but you saw fees go up to run this government. This has been a bad session. If you're a trooper or a DOC employee, it's been a bad session. Yeah. Matter of fact, I'll let Representative Proctor here in a minute discuss because he's the parrot on my shoulder. I'll let him because he's actually tried in a bipartisan manner to address some veterans issues, and so I'll let him talk about that in a minute. But you go down that whole list of people who lost in this session. We have grown. We'll say it again. The budget has grown in the last 2 years by $600 million, approximately $600 million. And in that time, we couldn't find a way to prioritize the people who protect us, the people who educate our children, the people who dedicated their lives to public service and are now retired and watch their cost of living go up without any cost of living adjustment. We couldn't find a way to prioritize for those folks. That's really disappointing.
It was his idea and what he was trying to move forward, and he deserves the credit for it. Representative Bennett from Republican from Sequoyah County. But we're here standing with him today because his leadership did not. Republican leadership in the House, Republican leadership in the Senate decided to prioritize dozens and dozens of things above treatment for PTSD for our military veterans, for our guys coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. We tried compromise after compromise after compromise, Representative Bennett and I, and still got nothing. Representative Bennett was even on the floor today trying to work a compromise, and it was still turned down by Senator Jolly in the Senate. To be able to get the program started for PTSD treatment could have been even less than $1 million, and yet at the same time we've got tax credits going to companies that don't need it. We've got, in the terms of icing on top of icing, the federal credits that they're getting. It's really easy to say you support veterans in this building. It's popular. We knock on thousands of doors saying that we support veterans. But when they come home and they're in need of our help, they've borne the battle, this legislature was nowhere to be found when they needed us the most. So that's my most disappointing part of this session is we didn't take care of those suffering from PTSD, and the state's going to see the repercussions of that years from now through lost earning potential of those veterans and the increased cost for treatment down the road. So happy to stand with Representative Bennett and extremely disappointed that wasn't funded.
The 600,000 Oklahomans who have no insurance in the state and the nearly 180,000 Oklahomans who will be left out in the cold because of this governor and this Republican leadership's decision not to take federal dollars, not to bring our federal dollars back home to make sure that they get insurance. They are major losers in this legislative session. We played political games. They played political games with their lives and with their health care. It was a decision based solely on politics, not based upon policy. The policy is clear. We accept over $3 billion a year from federal Medicaid dollars to take care of health care needs in our state. We already do that. This would have asked the federal government to bring in an additional $800 million a year of our tax dollars to simply take care of our constituents. And the governor decided she didn't want to do that. And then she comes out with, I believe Representative Shelton called it the dumbest idea he's heard all year. I think that's putting a point on it pretty precisely, because to come out and say we're going to spend $50 million to cover 9,000 people, which works at about $5,500 a head, when we could have used that same $50 million, added to it about another $10 million in 3 years, because for the first 3 years, all of those folks would have been covered for not one extra penny in Oklahoma. under the federal health care law. But for an extra about roughly $10 million, for about $60 million a year, you could have used all that $50 million from Insure Oklahoma, added about $10 million to it. For an extra $10 million a year, you could have covered 180,000 people and brought in $8.6 billion to help our rural hospitals and help our medical providers. That could have been done, should have been done. And by the way, if you do the math there, in terms of state dollars per person, it's like a little over $300 a person instead of $5,500 a person, which is what her plan to use $50 million to insure 9,000 people would do. It's just bad policy, bad arithmetic, and it's pure politics. And the people of Oklahoma are going to suffer from her decision.
The governor is inevitably going to say that this was a victorious session for her. And if you look at her priorities that she outlined in the State of the State, she got pretty much everything that she wanted, all of the big ticket items, tax cut, funding priorities. What would be your response to the governor saying that this was a great session?
But did she, though? I mean, the governor two and a half years ago got her major workers' compensation package. She didn't come in this year asking for workers' comp reform. Senator Bingman was the only person in the building asking for workers' compensation reform, and he forced it upon her, and she capitulated for whatever reason. She had her landmark workers' compensation reform package that was voted on and supported by many of the people here in my caucus, as well as the Democrats in the Senate. And she didn't ask for the workers' compensation reform. So I'm not sure it's a success for her when she comes in and said, essentially saying, I don't want to deal with that, and she had that forced upon her. She also said she wanted to have a tax cut this year. She didn't get that done. Senator Bingman said, I don't want a tax cut this year, and guess what? Senator Bingman won the fight, because a tax cut won't affect people's lives. It'll affect very few, first of all, but those few who are affected in whatever nominal way won't see that benefit until 2016. I don't view that as a success for Governor Fallin.
But they continue to consolidate authority under the governor's office, largely through OMPS. Is that, how important is that, do you think, in the overall scheme of things, or not that big a deal?
Well, I think there's some great investigative reporting opportunities, not to tell you how to do your job, involved there, because just look at what happened this year. A couple of years ago, we were told that we had to consolidate IT from all of these state agencies. We had to consolidate IT into Director Dorflinger's office, and that was going to save us money. But just this year, just a week or so ago, I believe, we offered up a bill that was going to increase funding. It was going to try to divert millions of new dollars into Director Dorflinger's office just to handle IT consolidation. Well, I don't know about you all, but when Representative Murphy and others stand up on the floor and say we're going to consolidate IT so that we can save money, for that effort to now cost more money 2 years down the road, seems to me there's something wrong there. Somebody may have sold a bill of goods that never came true. And so I'm not so sure that this consolidation of power isn't more about consolidation of power instead of actual savings to the state and our citizens.
What do you make about the last little bit last night over the education bill? Is there any kind of long-term implications of that?
Well, I think there are some. Last night's vote on the education trailer bill, I think, demonstrates a real chasm between the Republican leadership and the governor's office. Make no mistake about it, Representative Martin as the A&B chair and Speaker Shannon as the gentleman who appointed him to that position negotiated for the budget as it pertained to education this year. This was the budget that they agreed upon. If they didn't like it, if Chairman Martin and Speaker Shannon didn't like it, they could have changed what we had a chance to vote on last night. But not only did that compromise go out on the floor and fail, it failed with the majority of the Republican caucus voting against it, I believe, and the Speaker himself voting against it. That makes me scratch my head and wonder what's going on. And so I think that has greater implications for the working relationship under the dome going forward than it says necessarily about education.
Is that because of that Common Core curriculum? The Speaker has some concerns about it, and we understand there's supposed to be a resolution by Representative Blackwood that might come up later today that would require the Education Department to get approval from the legislature before they...
Yeah, primarily those no votes, Sally Kern and the rest of them, primarily the no votes on the Republican side, were because of the Common Core issue. I had many members of my caucus who voted no, and I, on its face, opposed the bill because I don't believe it gave enough resources to common education. They should have funded it more generously, and the fact that only 21 million of that money was going through the formula, we opposed that as well. We wanted more money going to the classroom. But they opposed it because of Common Core concerns. Again, it's just further evidence of this administration in the House of Representatives kowtowing to the fringe of the Republican Party. Whether it's Agenda 21 or nullification or now fears over Common Core, it's just simply their way of ceding authority to the fringe of the Republican caucus. That's all it is, because the folks who oppose Common Core, at least within his caucus, are oppose it because of the likes of Glenn Beck and others who continue to fearmonger on that issue. Make no mistake about it, Common Core is not perfect. Our caucus is not 100% supportive of Common Core. It needs to be tweaked. But for us, for the Speaker himself and his leadership, Representative Blackwell, Representative Jordan, the rest of them, to have debated in favor of Common Core just 3 years ago and voted for it, to now be flipping on that issue is bad form, in our opinion. And the people who we entrust to teach our kids have been busting their tail to implement Common Core because of what the legislature did a few years ago. And now they're told, because of Glenn Beck and some fringe elements in the Republican Party, we're going to throw all that away? How in the world do we expect common education to improve when we tell them to do something and then 2.5 years later we say, scrap it, we're going to go in another direction?
Scott, the state prison system is at more than 99% capacity. DOC needs thousands of more employees, and as you just said earlier, there's no pay raise in sight for them. We're one step away from federal control again of our prison system, and at least one nonprofit group is looking right now actively for a lawsuit to file. What do House Democrats do if that happens?
Well, we have fought adamantly all session long and for the last several years for increased funding. It's unfortunate that when it comes to our priorities in terms of the last few years trying to make sure DHS received the funding that it needed, it took a lawsuit to finally get the Republicans off high center to put money into the program to try to make significant changes. That's essentially what's going to happen. If a lawsuit's filed and we lose again, then House Republicans and House and Senate Republicans will have learned the lesson the hard way, in an expensive way. Instead of listening to us and common sense and saying, you know what, when you're staffed at 69% and 30% of those folks are eligible for food stamps, maybe you ought to address that situation. When one guard is responsible for 160 inmates in our correctional facilities on average, maybe you ought to fix that situation. So whether it's a lawsuit or a prison riot, it's going to take probably one of those significant and unfortunate events to convince the Republican majority that investing in corrections and public safety should be a priority. And so what do? We continue to add pressure. We continue to shine a light on it. My members go back home and talk to their constituents. They write back home in their papers trying to increase the visibility on this so that our citizens understand the dire nature that DOC currently exists in. And at this point, that's about what we can do.
So who are the winners in this session? You mentioned the losers.
Sure.
In your opinion, who comes away?
Primarily, the biggest winner's got to be businesses who create a bad working environment or a dangerous working environment, because now if somebody gets hurt on the job, they get the benefits that are paid out now are about on average 30% less than what they would have been before this particular session.
1% wage earners.
Yeah, you've got those folks in Oklahoma who make over $500,000 a year stand to gain about $2,000 back in a tax cut. So they'll win here in a couple of years. Those folks the lobbyists who control the tax credit market, they won this year on the whole. Representative Dank and us who support greater transparency in the tax credit process were unsuccessful this year. And so those lobbyists and those, I think Representative Reynolds called our agencies tax hogs. Well, if DHS is a tax hog in Representative Reynolds' eyes, then those corporations who come out here with hands out seeking more and more of our tax dollars to fund projects that don't create jobs, and they've got to be tax credit hogs, I suppose.
On the management of that chamber and how it's probably going to go to midnight.
It might. I hope it doesn't. But we get down to this. If you look at what we did last week, there were multiple days where we would come in. We gavelled in at 10. We gavelled out at 10:30, not dealing with one piece of legislation, and came back in at 1:30 and we're gone by 3. We did that multiple times last week. And so what's happening now is Republican leadership is coming to us, putting pressure on us to stop questioning bills, to stop debating bills. Well, that's what this process is about. And they're acting as if somehow we should just allow them, reward them for their bad time management. They knew that every year we get into this deadline week, and every year our members want to make sure that our voices are heard and the people that we represent have questions asked about legislation that's going to affect their lives. And for them to stand up and go, to try to wag their finger at us and say we're the ones causing them to have time management issues is laughable, because let's be honest, we've spent weeks either doing little to nothing, or like we did yesterday, we added over 2 hours worth of debate on a tobacco bill that was debated the day before for over an hour that got 66 no votes, with roughly, I think, 30 to 40 of them being Republicans. It was going nowhere. What's a waste of time? We followed that up with a bill that dealt with bonding issues, which was more of a press release issue than anything else. Another waste of time. And so even the legislation that they brought up in the last couple of days, a lot of it is either had no chance of passing, or which if they did a whip count, they would know that, or simply has no real effect on people's lives. And so bad time management is nothing new around here, and this week is just another exhibit of that. And I will say this, for the last couple of weeks, everybody's asked me and others said, oh, we're going to get out a week early. Generally speaking, we only have 16-week sessions. Because of the way the calendar falls, next Friday, the last day of May, happens to be a Friday, and so there's an extra week. If their poor time management pushes us into next week, it's not as if we're on schedule going to adjourn 2 or 3 days early. If we spend one more day here next week, we're spending more money in this legislative session than what we generally spend because of their poor time management. They know that, and they're going to do their best to get out of here so they're not wasting taxpayer dollars and coming back next week.
Before the session began, a lot of speculation on whether Speaker Shannon could hold together the different factions of the House Republicans. Some were even saying it would last 2 weeks or a month. He survived that, and his management skills toward the end, and a little bit of desire, I guess. But above all, were you surprised that he was able to keep basically his caucus in step with the major bills he wanted?
Well, I guess I tip my cap to him in the sense that he placated the fringe successfully. I mean, I don't know whether you want to go hang your hat on that or not. It's not necessarily where I'd want to be, but he did up until this last week. And you see now members both from the moderate wing of his party as well as from the sort of the more fringe element of his party, who are very frustrated with this process, who are very angry with the Speaker, and that's why you see all of a sudden bills that probably would have passed a couple of weeks ago now have 15 or 20 Republican no votes on them, just because they're sort of tired of the process. And this is bound to happen. We knew it would happen. Those of us in our caucus knew it would happen, because you can only promise folks we'll take care of your legislation, we'll get you so far, and then you get to the last week of session, and then there's nothing else you can do. And the promises run out, and then push comes to shove, they realize, okay, my bill's really not going to get heard. I've been placated all year long for nothing. And so you start to see some of the
Republican
fractures come about.
left the building that are down working and more right now because they were lied to.
Last night, yesterday, Representative Dorman caught them violating the rules. I stood up, made my case, and there were 40 votes actually 41, because Representative Blackwell pulled his name off. So there were at least 41 members and a few others who didn't vote, who were there. Their non-vote was there in support of our position. I would argue that yesterday there was close to 50 members of the Oklahoma House of Representatives who disagreed and were willing to say so, disagreed with the Republican Speaker. And a few weeks ago, that never would have happened. And it only happened this week because people, I think, are finally fed up with being placated, and they're going to stand up and vote their conscience. So.